Your 20s is naturally a tumultuous time because one, it's the first time that a lot of people are trying this whole adulting thing for the first time, and people are trying to figure out who they are and how they want to live their lives. I think for a lot of us, it's also a time when we're finally truly processing a lot of the trauma that happened to us when we were kids, basically because of the fact that we're getting more experience in the real world and realizing, oh wait, that thing that I experienced was totally fucked up. So obviously that is a lot of stuff to handle when you're in your 20s. So I wanted to use this video to share some lessons that I feel helped save my 20s. And this video was definitely inspired by Zach Hiley, who posted a video with a similar topic, and I thought that it was so helpful, and I felt like there was more that I wanted to share as well from my own experience. First, I think it's necessary for me to give context. At age 21, I was really struggling with depression and had thoughts of ending my life because of the fact that even though things were going fairly well on paper, my identity was totally wrapped up in this idea of professional success, and so I felt like a failure even if the smallest thing went wrong. I didn't really have a strong social support system, and I had no strategies to help maintain my mental health in a good state and to deal with stress. On my 25th birthday, I actually cried and I felt really isolated and hopeless in a lot of ways. And I didn't really feel like there was anything left in this world for me to experience and that was worth living for. But at that time, I had around 4 years in between where I had really kind of changed my core beliefs and came to value much more my relationships, self-care, and looking for daily happiness instead of tying up my happiness in all of these kind of extraneous things. And so that helped me a lot in terms of being able to make improvements to my mental health in small ways every day, even during times where I wasn't feeling so great. Now at age 26, I can definitely say that I am so glad that I stuck with it, and if I hadn't kind of made the conscious choice and kind of learned from these lessons that I'm going to share with you today, I wouldn't have been able to experience all of these wonderful friendships and kind of just gratification in my everyday life that I feel like I've been able to make a lot of improvements on over the last couple years, but I think especially in the last year or so. So let's get into the video. Now, the number one lesson that I feel is most important for you to realize while you're in your 20s as early as possible is that the most important relationship for you to manage is your relationship with yourself. And just like any relationship with your loved ones or with your colleagues, it's something that takes work. A really good example of this is when it comes to keeping promises. If you were making promises to your loved one and for some reason you kept breaking them, you would break their trust. They would stop believing you, that you would do things that you say you're going to do. And it works exactly the same way when it comes to your relationship with yourself. If you continually make promises to yourself and then break those every single day, you stop believing in yourself and you stop liking yourself. I think a quote from Will Smith really sums this up well, that self-discipline is self-love. So if you are currently in a state where you don't really like yourself, start by keeping one small promise to yourself. And through that one action, repeated every single day, you'll start to build motivation. And I think most importantly, you'll start to have a different identity around yourself. And I think that people get caught up in thinking that the way that they are now is the way that they're always going to be. But that's not really the case, and that brings me to lesson number 2. The second lesson that I think really saved my 20s is realizing that everything is temporary. So both the things that you love and the things that you hate in your life are all temporary. Now, the benefits of realizing this are twofold. For one thing, there might be certain things that you want to do in your life, but you feel a little bit of resistance or you feel like, oh, this really sucks. So for example, for me, one of my goals was just to wake up at the same time every day, and for me it was 6 a.m. And there are many times, not as much these days, and that's kind of related to this point, but when I was getting started, I would always feel resistance. I would always feel that urge to just go back to bed. But if you just kind of sit through it and kind of go about your day, brush your teeth kind of mindlessly, you will kind of pass through that feeling. It goes away on its own, and there's not really anything that you need to do except for just let that feeling pass. And so when it comes to negative emotions, for example, if you're feeling depressed or you're feeling really anxious, know that those things will pass. And I think that that can give people a lot of psychological solace and help them to get through those tough times. Basically, because everything is temporary, pain is temporary, you can kind of just let things go and kind of psychologically trick yourself in certain ways into doing what you actually want. On the other side of things, when things are really good or there are things that you really treasure or people, relationships that are very important to you, realizing that things are temporary and ephemeral, people can pass, or maybe they will leave you one day, or maybe the house that you live in will burn down. You don't know and you can't predict those kinds of things. But what you can do in the present when it comes to those things is to show gratitude, show it in your actions, treat them well today as if they were going to be gone tomorrow. And that way you can live, I think, better, both when it comes to dealing with the positive and negative emotions in your life. Now, the third lesson that I want to share that saved my 20s is to develop core beliefs the same way you develop hypotheses. You should test these beliefs either mentally or by discussing them with other people, and they should be beliefs that are consistent and future-proof. And now when I say consistent, I mean it's not something that you're only applying to yourself or applying to other people or a specific group or whatever it is. It should apply universally, and it should be something that under different circumstances should still hold true. I think that in my own experience and kind of reading from the lessons of others in books and in other kinds of media, that those are the kinds of core beliefs that will serve you well. Now, some really interesting research has been done in students on core beliefs, specifically around fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets. So for example, if you are a student who has a fixed mindset and your identity is that I am smart, let's say you enter into organic chemistry and your grades aren't really what you would expect. You're really struggling in class, the material seems really difficult. Those students who have a fixed mindset, believing that their identity is around being smart, tend to struggle more because they have this cognitive dissonance and they can't understand why they're struggling, and if they kind of reach a certain point, they might give up. Whereas someone who has a growth mindset, and maybe your identity is more so around I am resourceful, or I am a hard worker, or things that you can do, things that are not fixed characteristics that are kind of uncontrollable in a sense, you are much more likely to kind of persevere and therefore perform better in the long term. So for example, in that same organic chemistry class, if you have more of a growth mindset, you're not necessarily deterred or so psychologically distressed by the fact that your performance is not what you would expect. Instead, you can look for resources. You can find different ways of studying, and there are so many resources out there nowadays to help you, and that can help you improve your performance much better and also just increase your likelihood of sticking with things. So that's really, I think, a good example of different core beliefs that can be either limiting or freeing for you as an individual. And what I really want to get at here when it comes to thinking of core beliefs the same way you would hypotheses is that a bad core belief, and I'm defining bad as being bad for you, bad for your life and your well-being, will create mental blind spots because we create our kind of vision of the world around us through the filter of our brain and our core beliefs. And this is something that's really necessary for us as humans because there's just so much stimulus out in the world that our brain has to find a way to make sense of it. And a lot of the ways that it does that is by kind of creating these rules or these algorithms in your head that, oh, this is the way that things are. And so you want those beliefs to be very consistent and things that you feel are actually accurate and reflect what you truly believe rather than something that you've been told or that's been ingrained in you by whoever. You want these things to be things that are testable and that you can kind of revise over time and improve over time. Now, this next lesson that I want to share was in a way a tough pill for me to swallow, and that is that there is truly no free lunch. And another way that I'd like to put this is that maintenance takes renewal. just to stay in the same place that you want to go takes you all of this work. It's like you're running on a treadmill. Just to stay in the same place, you have to put all this consistent effort. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, what do I mean by this? I think a really good way to picture this is, for example, cleaning your house. If you do not clean your house for X amount of time, you're gonna have all of this entropy and you're just gonna amass all of this clutter and all of this trash. And that's kind of like the natural way of the world. But if you want to maintain a clean household, it takes a little bit of consistent effort all the time. You're gonna have to like make a routine of it, and you have to do it every single week. But for a long time, the child in me could not understand, like, why is my house like not able to stay clean? Not realizing that it will not stay clean on its own. I always have to be putting in a little bit of effort every day and every week to make sure that it's staying in a state that I want. Now, that's a little bit of a funny example for me as someone who used to be really messy, but it's a very true example for me. And I think that besides just the example of cleaning your house, this is also true with your relationships, and this is also true with your work. That you need to always be kind of maintaining things and putting in a little bit of effort every day in order for things to kind of stay good as they are. Otherwise, things will just naturally deteriorate, because that is the law of the universe and entropy exists everywhere. Now, I said that everything takes work, there's no free lunch, but that is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that while you do need to put in effort consistently in anything that you want to kind of maintain and keep in a good state, whether that's your work or fitness, your relationships, that work should be gratifying, at least gratifying most of the time. So, for example, with relationships, you certainly don't want to be maintaining toxic relationships. So you have to ask yourself, is being with this person making me happy? Are they uplifting me? Are they making me a better person? Or the same thing with so many other things in life. It should be worth the work that you're putting in. And if it is, and if you're able to put in the effort in the right way, then that work kind of becomes natural. Me and my partner, we do date nights every single week, and we also make sure that we spend time at the end of the night and we'll just watch an episode of anime together. And now that is putting an effort into the relationship, but that effort is in a way effortless. And there's this concept of wu wei in Taoism that is literally translated to effortless effort in English. And I think that that is a very good principle when it comes to the kind of effort that you're putting in to things that are important to you. So while me kind of maintaining my house in a clean state all the time was something that initially took more resistance, nowadays it's something that I often do without even thinking about it, in terms of putting away the dishes instead of leaving them on the counter and all of this other stuff that kind of like, they add up in terms of keeping the house clean, but over time that effort becomes effortless. The final lesson I'm going to share with you all in this video is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you are a medical student or a doctor, you're probably familiar with this phrase because it's part of the Hippocratic Oath. But I also think that this phrase is so true in terms of anything in life. And what I mean by that is that consistent everyday action will always, always, always beat out sporadic, high intensity efforts. Now, I was someone who was the queen of doing these kind of sporadic, high intensity effort types of things in college, and it totally burnt me out. I had no work-life balance and I had no circadian rhythm. I couldn't like get enough sleep, and I wouldn't sleep at the like consistent times. I'd be waking up at all different times of day and night, and it was just not a good time. And that definitely contributed to me not having great mental health. But nowadays, I focus much more on having everything be kind of streamlined and consistent, and kind of enjoying the process more, like enjoying the fact that this is me actually living my everyday life, and the efforts that I'm putting in, whether it's in studying medicine or doing research, all of that stuff is something that should be kind of inherently gratifying. I think that if you're going to do this every single day, it should be something that you actually enjoy, and that there are ways to find joy in the process. I think that in our culture today, it's much more results focused. And I'm not saying that results aren't important. I think that they certainly steer us in the right direction. But if you're miserable the entire time, I don't know if I would say that that's kind of living the way that you really want. It's certainly not maximizing for happiness. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and anything that you can do every day, that is your real life, and that's what's really going to make a difference, way more than any kind of sporadic effort or any kind of, 1 week vacation that you take off once a year, but then you're spending the rest of the year miserable. I don't think that that's a good way to live your life, and it was certainly not good for me coming into my 20s. So that is what I will leave you with for today. I hope this is really helpful. No matter where you are in life, I hope that you can apply these principles and start living better.